It took me 5 years and 6 attempts to finally get into Y-Combinator. Today, I'm going to walk you through that entire journey and 3 lessons I learned along the way. So I first heard about Y-Combinator when I was just a freshman at college. I didn't know too much about it except that it was a really big deal to get in, especially if you were an early stage startup. When I did some research, what I basically discovered was some really big companies had gone through the program when they were just getting started out. Companies like Reddit, Dropbox, Airbnb. And it was also kind of shocking that there was this organization that would literally pay you money to start your company. At the point, I didn't really understand venture capital or what equity meant. The standard deal changes from time to time, but usually it's $125,000 worth of investment for 7% of your company. At the time, I wasn't running a company. That being said, when I did start a company with a good friend of mine my junior year of college, we decided, hey, why the hell not? Let's just submit an application. It wasn't really surprising when we didn't get in that first time. We didn't really have much of a product, let alone any traction or revenue. The second time around, we were a lot more prepared. At this point, we had gone through the very first cohort of YC's MOOC, Startup School, where we got access to their core curriculum and got to learn a lot from other people building early stage startups. YC Startup School is a free online program made for anybody who's interested in starting a company, but not quite at the point where they're ready for YC's investment. It's totally free and it's available right now, and you could register if you wanted to. At this point, me and my co-founder were right at the point where we're about to graduate from college, and unexpectedly, we had some investors approach us and offer us a small amount of seed capital. It was only $25,000, but to a couple of college students, this seemed like so much money. We decided to raise another $25,000 from friends and family and move out to LA to work on the project full time. At this point, we had gotten a little bit of traction, not revenue, but letters of intent from companies interested in buying our product. And this time around, we actually got invited back for an interview. Now, the only bad news was that at this point, me and my co-founder had a little bit of a falling out, and I had left the company. And so this interview, as you could imagine, was a little bit of a shock because I knew I wouldn't be able to attend. I was devastated. This was a program that I had wanted to be a part of for so long, and to put in so much work into the application process and not even get to fly out to Mountain View and meet my idols in real life, that hurt. Anyways, at this point, I was a software engineer at Facebook. And for the next year and a half, that's exactly what I did. That being said, YC came knocking on my door again in the spring of 2018 when I attended the YC Spring Hackathon. Crypto was all the rage, so me and my partner worked on a really interesting application of crypto that allowed people who lived abroad to trade US stock using crypto assets. Shockingly, we actually won the hackathon and were invited to interview for the upcoming batch. Time to celebrate, right? Actually, wrong. I was still working at Facebook and it had been under a year. And so if I'd left Facebook at that point, I would have had to pay back a sizable amount of my signing bonus. I just wasn't in a position to do that, so this was another YC interview that I could not attend. That being said, this was a big turning point for my career. I had tasted the life of startups again, and I couldn't really go back. I needed to find a way to leave Facebook and build my own thing again. At this point, I decided to save as much money as I possibly can, and instead of paying off student loans, I was going to put them into a savings account that I could use to live off of whenever I decided to leave Facebook. It took about another year for me to save enough money, but I finally did, and March 8th, 2019 was my last day at Facebook. The YC applications were coming up, so I submitted one, and surprisingly, I got invited back for another interview. This time around, I actually did get to go to Mountain View. and boy was I nervous. Anybody who knows anything about the YC application process knows about their infamous interview. 10 minutes where you are hammered by the toughest questions by some of the smartest startup minds in the world. I spent weeks and weeks preparing, memorizing answers to hundreds of questions, hoping that this would help me land a coveted seat in the next batch. It did not. We were ripped apart and we got the rejection email about 7 p.m. the same day. Nonetheless, that wasn't going to stop me from trying again. So 6 months later, when I'd made a little bit more progress, I applied again. And I assumed because I'd made more progress, I was guaranteed an interview. I was not. I didn't even get an interview this time around, and I was just kind of sad. It's worth pointing out at this point, I'm 9 months into running this startup and I'm kind of running low on cash. So because I didn't get into YC, I had to start looking elsewhere for funding if I was going to keep working on this company. I reached out to some friends, I lined up some meetings, I flew down to San Francisco, and after a couple weeks, I actually landed about $300,000 of venture capital as a part of my pre-seed funding. This was actually a really big deal. At this point, I didn't really need YC. I had enough capital to keep me going for the next year and a half at the very least, even bring on a potential partner to see if this company could actually become something. But then fast forward to March 2020, and now COVID is fully upon us. And my online education startup just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and we just started to see some crazy growth. I decided to apply to YC yet again, not really expecting much, but knowing that we had some really solid growth and traction this time around. I went into the interview. It was completely virtual this time around because of the pandemic. I was super nervous, thought I totally messed it up, and all day, all I could think about was all the answers I could have said differently or better. Around 10 o'clock, I keep refreshing my email, just waiting for the rejection email to come in, but it never does. And then a few minutes later, I get a call from a California number. Turns out it was Adora Chung, one of the partners at YC, who had interviewed me, and she told me I was in. I was going to be part of the summer 2020 batch of YC, the first ever remote batch. As you could imagine, I was so happy, so excited. This has been my dream for 5 years at this point, and I had finally gotten it. It took me 5 years and 6 attempts to finally get into YC. So what did I learn throughout all that process? Mainly 3 things. The first being YC admits startups that don't need YC. Now, that might sound counterintuitive, but as you'll remember, I landed funding the fall before I got into YC. Just at the point that I already had funding and growth and revenue and didn't really need them was the time that they actually wanted to invest. Remember, the best startups are already on a path to success. YC just tends to be a stamp of approval. And if you're really building something valuable, you won't need them in the end. Number 2, become an expert on your business, not startups. Too many people like to play entrepreneur rather than doing what's actually required to building your business. Understand who are your customers, what are their pain points, how are you making their life easier? If you can answer these questions, you're ahead of probably 80% of applicants. And the last thing is keep building. So many people give up if they don't get into this program, but as you learn from my story, I just kept chugging along because at the end of the day, it was more important for me to build this business and solve this problem than it was to get into YC. And if you believe in your business, you should do the same. I have another video where I share about my exact experience going through the first ever remote batch of YC. If you haven't checked that out, it's going to be in the description. With that, I hope this was valuable. And with that, this is Ish signing off.